So, uh, have you ever stopped to think about how you actually see the world? I mean, beyond just, a collection of distinct objects. We talk a lot about systems, don't we? The healthcare system, the economic system, even our team's workflow system. But what if the very way we understand these systems is, well, far more nuanced, maybe even a bit misdirected than we usually imagine? Today, we're taking a deep dive into some really, really thought-provoking ideas. We're exploring Heidegger's insights on systems thinking and cybernetics. And this whole journey is based on a series of really insightful posts by an author named Harish. For those of you who might not know Harish, let me just give you a little introduction. He describes himself as a lifelong learner, someone with a real passion for reflection and exploration. Through his writing, he shares these incredible insights on cybernetics, systems thinking, lean, statistics, just a whole range of connected ideas. He's also an active member of Cybersyn, that's CYB3RSYN. It sounds like a really vibrant community with exclusive resources, books, podcasts, forums, the whole lot. His work, honestly, it just opens up new ways of looking at familiar concepts, really challenges you to think deeper.
Absolutely. And our mission today really is to dig into how Martin Heidegger's philosophical ideas, which, let's be honest, can sometimes feel pretty challenging, pretty dense, how they offer this profound, very humanistic lens, a lens for understanding not just systems thinking, but actually the core principles of cybernetics too. We're going to unpack some surprising insights, things that really push back against common assumptions. The aim is to help you grasp that really nuanced relationship between, our practical, everyday engagement with the world and how the systems we talk about actually emerge from that. It's really about getting to the heart of how we relate to and make sense of the world around us.
Okay, but before we dive any deeper, there's something really important we need to address up front. It's crucial. Martin Heidegger, whose philosophical work we're drawing on, he had an affiliation with the Nazi Party. This is a deeply troubling historical fact, and it casts this long, painful shadow over his legacy. It's something we absolutely cannot and should not ignore. So while the ideas we're discussing today are drawn purely from his philosophical work, we need to be crystal clear. This is not an endorsement of the man or his actions, not in any way. Engaging with his work requires ethical vigilance, and we think it's really important not to separate ideas from their broader context, even while we focus on the intellectual contributions themselves. We just wanted to make that explicitly clear from the start. All right, with that important note made, let's jump into part one of this deep dive, being in the system Heideggerian insights into our primary engagement. Harish kicks off his series with this really bold, almost provocative statement: systems do not exist. Now, that immediately makes you think, doesn't it? Like, okay, are we talking subjectivity here? Or even solipsism, the idea that only my mind exists? Can you unpack that initial, pretty radical premise for us?
Yeah, it's designed to be jarring, isn't it? It immediately stops you in your tracks. When Harish quotes that systems do not exist, he's throwing down a gauntlet to our most basic assumptions about how we perceive reality. Heidegger, in his work, fundamentally rejects what philosophy calls the subject-object dichotomy. This way of thinking, it's really dominated Western thought since Descartes, right? This idea of a clear separation. There's a distinct subject, that's us, the thinking, observing self, and then there's a separate external object, the world, things out there. Heidegger basically says, hang on a minute, that's not actually how we primarily experience the world. Not most authentically, anyway. His focus is much more on our practical engagement with things, how they fit into our everyday use, our context. And he uses this brilliantly simple, yet incredibly insightful example. A person using a hammer. Think about it. When you're skillfully hammering a nail, you're focused on the task, right? You don't perceive the hammer as some distinct object separate from yourself as the subject holding it. You're not running through a mental checklist. Hammer, wood handle, metal head. I am holding it. Apply force. No. You are, as Heidegger puts it so well, together caught up in a unified field of practical activity. The hammer just is what it's for, in the act of hammering. It kind of recedes, it blends in, it just works. This is what he calls ready-to-handedness. Zuhandenheit in German. It's our primary, most fundamental way of being in the world. A world where tools and things are just there for us, ready to be used, often without us even thinking about them. They're ready to hand. Now, contrast that. It's only when the hammer breaks a head flies off, or you hit your thumb, ow! Or maybe it's just the wrong tool for the job. Then it shifts. Suddenly, it's not something you're using seamlessly, almost invisibly. It becomes an object of explicit, detached attention. That's when it becomes present at hand, Vorhandenheit. You start looking at it, thinking about its properties, its flaws, why it isn't working. And this distinction, it's absolutely crucial for thinking about systems because it gives us this really nuanced view of what systems actually are. The idea that systems are mental constructs isn't just a simple subjective versus objective debate. It's much deeper. It's about recognizing the fundamentally practical, engaged nature of our relationship with the world itself. It's about how things show up for us in the context of our lives, our purposes.
Okay, yeah, that hammer example really clarifies it. You don't see the hammer until it stops working for you. So if that ready-to-handedness is our primary mode, what does this mean for how we usually think about systems? Because typically we treat them as if they are objectively out there, don't we? Like an org chart or the traffic grid or the internet. We draw diagrams, analyze them like they exist totally separate from us.
That's exactly the core challenge Heidegger throws at our usual way of thinking. We tend to act as if systems are these pre-existing things, like finding a new species of plant, just waiting to be discovered and cataloged. But from this Heideggerian angle, when we identify a system, what we're actually doing is performing an act of abstraction. We're pulling something out from the background. And this abstraction, this framing, it's always guided by our practical concerns, by what we're doing or what we're trying to do. We're not just passive observers here. We're actively selecting certain elements, these bits are relevant, and drawing boundaries around them, often without even realizing it. And we're identifying patterns, relationships between those chosen elements. But in doing that, we're simultaneously ignoring countless other potential elements and relationships that just don't seem relevant to our current purpose. This whole selection process, this framing act, it's inherently pragmatic. It's shaped by what Heidegger calls our concernful dealings with the world. What matters to us right now? What are our goals? What are we trying to achieve or maybe avoid? And this ties right into Heidegger's idea of world. For him, the world isn't just a big container full of objects. Instead, the world is a context of significance. It emerges for us. It takes shape through our projects, our concerns, our practical activities. And similarly, systems don't exist like rocks as independent structures we just stumble upon. No, they emerge as pragmatic ways we organize our engagement with reality. They're useful frameworks, maybe conceptual tools that we create and use because they help us deal with a particular set of concerns or achieve a specific goal or just make sense of something complex. So when Heidegger pushes back against that rigid subject-object split, he's pointing to something more fundamental that comes before either pure subjectivity or pure objectivity. It's our basic practical involvement in what he calls being in the world. Systems, in this view, don't just pop out of our heads like a dream, pure subjectivity, nor are they just sitting there entirely separate from us like a mountain, pure objectivity. They emerge from this deeper practical engagement. It's a really profound shift, moving away from a detached intellectual view towards something much more embodied and, well, practical.
That is a huge shift, yeah. It suggests we're much more active in shaping what a system even is. And this next quote from Heidegger you shared, it really hammers this home, especially that ready-to-hand idea. He says, "The ready-to-hand is not grasped theoretically at all. The peculiarity of what is proximately ready to hand is that, in its readiness to hand, it must, as it were, withdraw in order to be ready to hand quite authentically." Unquote. Can you unpack that? Especially that idea of something having to withdraw to be authentic. It sounds almost paradoxical.
It is paradoxical, isn't it? But it's absolutely central to his thinking. It's profound. When he says the ready to hand is not grasped theoretically at all, he's really doubling down on this idea that our primary way of dealing with things isn't through detached analysis. We don't first build a mental model of a keyboard, analyze its layout, and then decide to type. No, we just type. In our everyday life, we encounter things directly as meaningful within our practical concerns. They're just there, ready for use. We don't see them as objects with properties first. We see them as tools, as equipment, as part of what we're doing. The focus is on the doing, not the thinking about the thing itself. Now, that second part, it must, as it were, withdraw in order to be ready to hand quite authentically. That's the real kicker. It gets to the essence of skilled, fluent action. Think about it again. When you're truly skilled with a tool, driving a car, playing an instrument, typing, the tool itself kind of disappears from your conscious attention. It recedes, becomes invisible in a way. It feels like an extension of you. Or maybe you and the tool become part of one single fluid activity. A skilled surgeon isn't consciously thinking scalpel, object, in hand. Their attention flows through the scalpel to the tissue, to the task. The carpenter isn't contemplating the hammer's design. They're absorbed in driving the nail, the rhythm of the work. The tool, when it's authentically ready to hand, becomes invisible precisely because it's working so effectively. It fulfills its purpose so seamlessly it doesn't even register as a separate thing. And this withdrawal, it's not a bug, it's a feature. It's crucial for authentic practical engagement. The very moment you stop using the hammer skillfully and start theoretically contemplating it, maybe you're showing it off, maybe it broke, maybe you're just admiring it, it has already shifted its mode of being for you. It's gone from ready to hand, part of the flow, to present at hand, an object of detached observation, separate from your immediate task. At that point, it's lost its primary mode as equipment. The act of looking at it changes its status for you.
Okay, wow. So if that's true for a simple tool like a hammer, what does this withdrawal mean when we think about complex systems? How do they function effectively in the real world? Because we're always talking about optimizing systems, making them more visible, more measurable, but you're suggesting their effectiveness might actually rely on them not being the focus, on them withdrawing.
Exactly. It's a fundamental paradox, and it cuts right against how we often approach systems improvement. Let's take Harish's example again. Healthcare systems. They work best, most effectively, not when the doctors and nurses are constantly thinking about the system as some abstract flowchart. Their focus, their primary concern, has to be the patient, diagnosing, treating, comforting. The underlying structures, the protocols, the equipment, the communication channels, all that stuff needs to withdraw from explicit attention. It needs to become the invisible scaffolding that allows the practitioner to work through it smoothly, rather than constantly having to consciously work on it. Think about a busy emergency room Harish mentions being inspired by the show The Pit, which portrays this world. A really skilled ER nurse isn't consciously accessing an abstract model of the triage system and applying it rule by rule. No, they embody it in the practice. They move seamlessly, assessing, responding, prioritizing almost instinctively. There's a flow. The system, for them, is ready to hand. It's the invisible support structure. But the moment that nurse has to stop and explicitly think about how the system works, maybe there's a confusing new procedure or a major breakdown, or they're justifying their actions or dealing with bureaucracy that smooth flow gets broken. The system, which was ready to hand, suddenly becomes present at hand, an object of frustrating contemplation. And the efficiency, the fluidity, the care often suffers. This withdrawal is fundamental. It's not a flaw in complex systems. It's essential for skilled practice. Systems organize complexity effectively precisely because they recede from explicit attention when they're working well. They provide that invisible structure for our practical dealings. The irony is, the moment we make these systems the explicit focus of our theoretical attention-drawing diagrams, analyzing them as separate objects, treating them like abstract puzzles, we've often already stepped away from their primary function, which is to organize meaning in practice. And this is why, as Harish points out, simply trying to perfectly model complex systems or engineer them from a detached viewpoint often fails to actually improve practice on the ground. It shifts our orientation away from that fluid, ready-to-hand engagement towards a detached, present-at-hand contemplation. And in doing so, it misses the practical wisdom, the tacit knowledge, the skillful flow embedded in actual doing. We lose touch with the lived experience.
That's such a powerful and subtle point. Sometimes focusing less on the abstract structure lets it work more authentically. Which leads perfectly into another fascinating idea Harish discusses, the pluralism of systems. If systems emerge from our practical concerns, does that mean everyone sees a different system? Is it all just relative?
You've hit the nail on the head. Yes, that's the implication. And it builds directly on this idea that our practical orientation shapes what we see. As Harish puts it, different practical orientations bring forth different systems from the same reality. Let's use his forest example. It's great. Imagine a forest. To an ecologist, that forest is a complex ecological system. They see nutrient cycles, species interactions, biodiversity metrics, carbon sequestration. Their concerns are about conservation, balance, health. To a logger, that same forest is a system of timber resources. They see board feet, harvest schedules, economic value, supply chains. Their concerns are about yield, efficiency, profit. To a spiritual seeker, or maybe just a hiker, it could be a system of sacred groves, energy flows, ancient wisdom, or simply a place for peace and connection. The physical reality, the trees, the soil, the animals is the same, but it appears as fundamentally different systems because the practical concerns, the goals, the ways of engaging and interpreting are totally different. Now, importantly, this doesn't mean reality is just whatever you want it to be. It's not pure subjectivity where you can just imagine a forest made of cheese and that's a valid system.
Yeah.
Systems are still constrained. They're constrained by the resistance of the external world. Trees are still trees, gravity still works, and also by our shared practices, our cultural understandings, our language. So systems aren't just arbitrary mental projections, but nor are they simply objective structures we discover fully formed. They are fundamentally practical organizations of meaning that emerge from our concernful dealings with the world. They are frameworks we use to understand and act, shaped by our purposes. And this has huge implications for how we think about the validity of different system descriptions. It suggests that the different ways of drawing boundaries, different descriptions, can be equally valid. But their validity isn't universal or absolute. It depends entirely on the specific practical context. The healthcare system, the ecological system, the economic system applied to that forest, they aren't competing for the title of the one true description. They are pragmatically useful constructions, each serving different purposes, guided by different concerns, each revealing a particular aspect of the world relevant to a specific set of practices. And this completely changes how we should think about understanding someone else's system. It's not about trying to download their mental model like it's a static blueprint you can just copy and compare to yours. Instead, it's about trying to grasp the practical context in which that system emerged for them. It means understanding their specific concerns, their skills, their history, their goals, how they actually engage with the world. You're not trying to see their map. You're trying to understand their journey, what they're trying to do. So when we say systems are mental constructs, it's not saying they're just flimsy interpretations. It's recognizing that each person brings a unique, embodied way of being involved with the world. This construct isn't some abstract idea floating in their head. It's situated in their lived experience, embodied in their actions, shaped by what's practically relevant to them. And because there's such a huge variety of practical orientations and histories, different systems can and do emerge from the same situation, depending on who's involved and what they're up to. As Heresh puts it so beautifully, and this is a real punchline here, systems are emergent expressions of lived involvement, often unique to those who live it. They aren't found, they are brought forth. So trying to truly understand another person's system, it becomes an act of empathic attunement. It's not about mind reading, it's about listening deeply, listening to how the world discloses itself to them through their practices, their actions, their concerns. You're not just trying to get inside their head, you're trying to step into a shared space where meaning unfolds, where your world and their world start to overlap. And if we take a second order perspective, meaning we think about the observer's role, the very act of observing brings our own stuff into the picture, our own background, our own concerns, our own practices, what Heidegger called our thrownness. So the observer is also disclosing their world while watching another world get disclosed. This whole encounter between systems or between perspectives is itself a kind of system that emerges through dialogue, through empathy, through mutual disclosure, and engaging genuinely like this. It requires a massive amount of epistemic humility, knowing the limits of our own view, and ontological humility, respecting the validity of other ways of being.
That is incredibly insightful. Yeah. It makes understanding systems feel much more human, much less mechanistic. So if we take this unique humanistic view from Heidegger, what does it mean for how we actually practice systems thinking? How do we apply these ideas in our work or when we're trying to solve problems?
Well, Heresh offers some really clear, practical takeaways for systems thinking grounded in this perspective. First, really pay attention to the practical concerns and the lived engagements. Don't just ask people what they think the system is or look at the official flowchart. Observe how people actually work, how they use their tools, navigate their environment, improvise. That tells you much more about the system in its ready-to-hand mode. Second, pay close attention when things break down. System breakdowns are incredibly revealing. They expose the underlying assumptions, the things we normally take for granted that just withdraw from view. When the hammer breaks, its hammerness becomes visible, but so do our assumptions about its reliability. Breakdowns show where our abstract models might be missing the lived reality. Third, focus critically on how and why boundaries get drawn the way they do. Why is this considered part of the system and that excluded? These choices are never neutral. They always reflect practical concerns, power dynamics, history. Questioning boundaries is a powerful way to uncover those hidden assumptions. Fourth, remember that models and diagrams are provisional tools. They are not the absolute truth. They're useful for certain purposes, for navigating specific concerns, maybe for communication, but they are not the reality itself. They're just one particular picture drawn for a reason. Fifth, and this is so important, acknowledge our own role as observers in shaping what we see. We aren't neutral flies on the wall. Our concerns, our background, our thrownness, our unique situation all influence how the system appears to us. Our engagement is always active participation. And finally, make space for plurality, for emergence, for non-finality. Systems aren't static, perfectly defined things. They're dynamic, constantly emerging through interactions, and open to multiple valid interpretations depending on the practical context. This whole approach encourages a much more flexible, empathetic, and ultimately, I think, more effective way of engaging with complexity, moving beyond rigid control towards a more adaptive, nuanced understanding.
That's a fantastic bridge into the second part of Heresh's series. It shifts focus a bit to Heidegger's later concepts. If part 1 was about the ready-to-hand nature of systems, part 2 is called System on the Shelf from Control to Care, Challenging the Fix-It Mentality. And you mentioned it draws inspiration from that show, The Pit, set in ER. That sounds like the perfect setting to explore how our ideas about fixing things might actually need fixing themselves.
It really is, because in a lot of traditional, maybe hard systems thinking, the default view is often that a system is like an external object. Something you identify, analyze, map out, and then fix. You set goals, draw boxes and arrows, figure out the inputs and outputs, and then you tweak it to improve efficiency or solve a specific problem. It's very much about seeing interconnected parts and optimizing them. But Heidegger comes along and profoundly challenges that. He reimagines systems thinking not just as a tool for optimization, not just about making things run faster or smoother, but as a fundamental way of engaging with the world that prioritizes deeper reflection, genuine inclusion, and ultimately something like emancipation. And in doing that, as Harish puts it so perfectly, this reimagining sets the stage for fixing the notion of fixing the system. That phrase itself is just brilliant. It captures the core shift.
So, okay, let's unpack that. Fixing the notion of fixing the system. That sounds like it goes way beyond just changing a process chart.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's about our whole mindset, our fundamental approach.
It goes much, much deeper, profoundly so. Think about how we usually react when something goes wrong in a complex situation, like in an organization. We often point to the visible stuff, the forms, the procedures, the software, the org chart, and we mistakenly think the system is that physical stuff, that it exists out there, separate from us. So when something breaks, bias creeps in, things are inefficient, people are treated unfairly, our immediate instinct is to analyze it, optimize it, manage it, like it's an external object we can tinker with. We say things like, we just need to find the bottlenecks, or we need better metrics, or we need to re-engineer the process. But this whole approach assumes the system is something that can be precisely controlled and engineered, almost like a machine. And this is exactly where Heidegger brings in his really powerful and challenging concept of Gestell. Gestell, it's a German word. In everyday use, it can mean a physical shelf or a rack, a framework. But Heidegger uses it to mean something far more significant. It describes how modern technology fundamentally frames our entire approach to the world. It's not just about the tools we use, it's a whole way of revealing the world to us. His main critique is that modern technology frames the world as what he calls standing reserve base stand. In this view, everything, nature, people, resources, even time itself, gets seen primarily as just resource, something to be optimized, controlled, managed efficiently, ordered, put on call. It's like everything is just sitting on a shelf, waiting to be used, ready to deliver maximum output. And this isn't just a conscious choice we make, it's a pervasive worldview in modern life. It's often invisible because it's so deeply baked into how we operate. It's not just about having the wrong ideas or using flawed methods. It reflects a deeper, almost insidious shift in how the world itself shows up for us. Now, apply that Gestell concept to systems thinking. What happens? It means that even when we're trying our best to fix systems, maybe even with good intentions, we might still be operating entirely within that same technological and framing mindset. We focus on creating precise models, defining clear boundaries, measuring inputs and outputs. We're still seeing the system as something external to be engineered and controlled, like a complex machine. According to Heidegger, we can't just escape this pervasive framing by tweaking our analytical methods or drawing better diagrams. It's deeper than that. We need a fundamental shift in our understanding of how the world reveals itself to us. And this isn't a shift you can engineer with a 5-step plan or a new piece of software. It's something we have to arrive at more organically through a different kind of reflection, a different kind of engagement, which naturally leads us to that crucial question. If fixing the system in this instrumental, controlling way isn't the real answer, what is? And this is where we really see that move from control towards care.
Wow. That's incredibly powerful. So if fixing the system isn't the solution, and if our very way of seeing is shaped by this Gestell, what is the alternative? This sounds like a massive shift, almost a completely different philosophy for how we deal with complex situations.
It absolutely is. It's a radical reorientation. For Heidegger, the real hope for navigating our technological age doesn't lie in building better models or faster algorithms for control. It lies in what he called a new beginning of thinking. And what that means is, instead of treating the world and the systems in it as just collections of problems to be solved or resources to be optimized, we're encouraged to engage with the world as a field of beings to care for. That shift is profound. It implies approaching the world not as a bunch of inert objects we can manipulate and control, but as this dynamic, interconnected web, a web of living entities, each with its own intrinsic value and meaning beyond just its usefulness to us. It's really a call to relate to the world with a sense of reverence, responsibility, maybe even wonder. And this shift from control to care, it has very practical implications for how we actually do systems thinking. It means stepping back from that ingrained, almost automatic impulse to fix the system from the outside, like a mechanic fixing a car. Instead, the focus shifts to how we are framing the system in the first place, and crucially, our own relationship to it. It encourages us to ask really critical questions like, okay, who defined this system this way? What values, what interests are baked into that definition, maybe implicitly? And what is being concealed or left out by framing it this way? Whose voices aren't being heard? What realities are ignored? Asking these kinds of questions actively resists that Gestell mindset. It pushes us towards a more open, more reflective, and much more inclusive approach. And this aligns really nicely with the principles of soft systems thinking, which also emphasizes understanding different perspectives, values, and worldviews within any situation. It's about being receptive, not imposing.
Right. And that connects directly to the idea of boundaries, doesn't it? How we draw those lines around a system really determines what we see and what gets left out. And you're saying those choices are never neutral.
Absolutely spot on. From this perspective, system boundaries are never fixed, never God-given, never absolute. They're always contingent, always chosen, always drawn. Every boundary we draw, whether it's explicit on a diagram or just implicit in how we talk and act, it includes certain things and simultaneously excludes others. And crucially, these decisions about inclusion and exclusion, they're made by whoever has the power to define the system, and they are never neutral. They always reflect specific values, interests, power dynamics. Think about healthcare again. You could define the healthcare system very narrowly. Hospitals, doctors, insurance companies, focusing mostly on treating sickness. Or you could define it much more broadly. Include public health, social determinants like housing and education, community support, environmental factors that affect health. The boundaries you choose profoundly shape how you understand the problem, what you consider inside the system, and therefore what kinds of solutions even seem possible or relevant. So this calls for really deep critical reflection. We need to ask, who holds the power to define the system? And consequently, who benefits from that definition and who might be disadvantaged or excluded by it? This is where the focus shifts really powerfully towards emancipation. Emancipation in this context means actively challenging those dominant, often taken for granted framings of the system. It means reimagining the boundaries in ways that are more just, more equitable, more inclusive. It's about deliberately opening up the framing process itself, empowering marginalized voices, bringing in perspectives that have been ignored or suppressed, co-creating a system or an understanding of the system that reflects a much richer diversity of experience. It's not about finding the one right system boundary, but creating space for many valid perspectives to coexist and inform each other. In its deepest Heideggerian sense, this is about liberating systems thinking, moving it away from being just a tool for control or optimization or reinforcing existing power structures, and transforming it into a process of unveiling hidden realities, hidden assumptions, and co-creating alternative, more humane futures. It involves a willingness to let go. That's a central theme here. Letting go of the need to dominate and control, and instead being truly receptive to the world around us, allowing things to emerge, allowing them reveal themselves without immediately trying to force them into our predefined boxes or optimize them according to our metrics. Heidegger encourages us to shift our fundamental attunement, how we relate to systems. Instead of seeing them as machines to fix, engage in a way that's more reflective, more inclusive, ultimately more humane, prizing care over control.
That phrase, letting go of control, it might sound really counterintuitive to a lot of people, right? Especially in fields like management or engineering, where control, predictability, those are often the holy grail. Can you dive a bit deeper into what letting go truly means here? Because it feels like it could be easily misunderstood as just giving up.
That's a really vital point to clarify, yeah, because it's so often misinterpreted as passivity or resignation. When we talk about letting go in systems thinking from this Heideggerian angle, we're talking about relinquishing that deep-seated, almost instinctual desire to control or optimize systems in the traditional mechanistic totalizing way. You know, in a lot of standard systems thinking, the emphasis is heavily on finding the right model, fixing the inefficiencies, predicting and controlling the outcomes. There's often this underlying assumption that you can engineer the system into some ideal state, like tuning an engine. It's about imposing a solution from the outside in. Heidegger's perspective, though, asks us to let go of that specific drive, that drive for absolute mastery and total optimization. It's a really radical shift. Instead of focusing intently on fixing the system as if it's an external object, he encourages us to focus on how we relate to it. This means shifting our attention away from trying to rigidly control specific outcomes and towards engaging with the system in a way that's more reflective, more open, more inclusive. It's a profound shift from doing to the system to being with the system, allowing it to disclose itself, reveal its own dynamics in its own terms. So letting go is absolutely not about abdicating responsibility. It's not about resigning ourselves to chaos or giving up on making things better. Not at all. It's about releasing that impulse to always have a perfectly fixable, perfectly controllable solution ready at hand. It's about recognizing that complex systems are inherently complex. They're often messy, unpredictable, dynamic. And meaningful change from this perspective often comes not from imposing rigid solutions from the top down, but from attuning ourselves to these complexities, from understanding their inherent dynamics, their emergent properties, from really listening to what the system is telling us, rather than just forcing it into our preconceived mold, which might cause all sorts of unintended, damaging consequences. It's about acknowledging that sometimes the wisest way to influence a system is to understand its natural unfolding, its own rhythms, and gently nudge it, rather than trying to completely re-engineer it based on an abstract plan. It requires humility and openness.
Okay, let's revisit that emergency room example from the pit. How would this idea of letting go of control actually play out in that kind of environment? It's high pressure, incredibly complex. Control often feels absolutely essential there.
It's the perfect and maybe most challenging illustration, isn't it? In a typical ER, maybe one struggling with long wait times, staff burnout, patient dissatisfaction. The traditional approach, operating within that Gestell mindset we talked about, would usually focus on things like optimizing wait times, improving patient throughput metrics, redesigning workflows on paper. These are all about efficiency and control, treating the ER largely as a machine to be tuned or a process flow to be streamlined. Metrics become the primary focus. A Heideggerian approach, however, would invite us to engage with that ER not just as a system to be fixed, but as a shared world, a lived reality. It would prompt us to ask much deeper, more human questions that go beyond just the numbers. What does this ER environment actually mean to the people who work here day in, day out? The doctors, the nurses, yes, but also the cleaners, the administrators, everyone. What does it mean to the patients and their families who arrive, often in crisis, full of fear and vulnerability? What are the invisible boundaries shaping this system? Not just the walls, but the unspoken rules, the power dynamics, the cultural norms, the sheer emotional labor involved. And who really gets to define what a good day in the ER looks like? Is it just about hitting efficiency targets? Or is it about patient dignity, staff well-being, trust, a sense of shared purpose? By creating space for these kinds of questions, by genuinely being open to the complex, messy realities of human experience within the ER, we allow that environment to disclose itself in a much richer, more human way. This kind of engagement invites genuine reflection and potentially co-creation among everyone involved. And an approach like this might lead to solutions that go way beyond just tweaking efficiency metrics. It could lead to changes that genuinely restore dignity to patients, foster real care and collaboration among staff, rebuild trust within the whole hospital community. You start to see the hospital not just as a system to optimize or a place where resources are managed, but as a place where people, patients, doctors, nurses, janitors, visitors are engaged in a shared, living, and often deeply emotional experience. Instead of just focusing on throughput numbers, we learn to listen deeply, understand needs, respond with genuine care and attention. And this kind of thing, this focus on the human element, is apparently beautifully portrayed in The Pit, the show Harridge mentioned. It shows how the ER staff, when they're at their best, are deeply focused on the human elements of care, pausing to notice the small things, a shift in a patient's mood, the tone of a colleague's voice, the atmosphere in the room. It's about being fully present, attuned to the human experience unfolding right there, embodying that principle. Treat the patient, not the protocol. The formal system, the protocol, it needs to recede sometimes to allow for that deeper, more authentic human connection. The system should facilitate care, not become the sole object of rigid control.
That's a powerful shift in perspective, yeah. It really sounds like the true emancipation isn't about gaining more control, but maybe about finding freedom from the constant need to control everything.
Exactly, you've nailed it. Ultimately, when we integrate Heidegger's profound critique of technology into how we think about systems, it teaches us something crucial. True emancipation isn't about achieving better, tighter, more complete control over systems. It is perhaps paradoxically, about achieving freedom from that relentless need to control systems in that podalizing, instrumental, Gestell-driven way. The real transformative shift doesn't come from just improving our models or creating more inclusive diagrams or implementing the latest management technique. It comes from what Heidegger called a new beginning of thinking, a way of thinking that is fundamentally more reflective, more inclusive, and deeply ethical in how we frame and how we engage with the complex systems all around us. It's a reorientation of our entire way of being. And this leads directly to Heidegger's really stark warning about the dangers of this technological enframing, this Gestell, as he states in a quote Harish highlights. Enframing not only conceals a former way of revealing, bringing forth, but it conceals revealing itself and with it. That where an unconcealment, i.e. truth, comes to pass. That's a dense quote. But for Heidegger, this is the most insidious danger of Gestell. It doesn't just hide one particular way the world used to reveal itself or one specific aspect of reality. No, its deeper, more profound danger is that it conceals the very process of revealing itself. It makes us forget that the world is always dynamically coming into view, disclosing itself to us through our engagement. It's like, imagine wearing glasses that distort your vision. That's bad enough. But the truly dangerous part is if the glasses also make you completely forget that you're even wearing glasses in the first place. You mistake the distorted, resource-focused view for objective reality itself, and you lose the capacity to even question how you are seeing, or to imagine that there could be other ways for reality to show up for you. We get trapped in this single instrumental mode of understanding.
That is a chilling thought. That the very way we interact with technology could be blinding us to deeper truths, maybe even to the process of truth itself. If enframing conceals revealing itself, then what hope is there? How do we break free? This brings us perfectly to the final part of Harish's series, where he dives into Heidegger's really surprising connection to cybernetics. He opens with that famous, almost shocking quote from Heidegger's 1966 Spiegel interview. And what now takes the place of philosophy? Heidegger, cybernetics. Wow, that's a pretty stark statement, isn't it? Coming from one of the 20th century's most influential philosophers. What on earth did he mean by that?
It is incredibly stark, yes, and highly provocative. It speaks directly to Heidegger's deep, almost existential concern about where modern society was heading. He saw that our increasing reliance on technology, on calculation, on control, was leading humanity away from thinking itself, away from that deep, reflective inquiry into the nature of existence, into what he called being. So when he declared that cybernetics was replacing philosophy, he wasn't necessarily giving cybernetics a thumbs up as philosophy's worthy successor. Not at all. Rather, he was pointing to a powerful and, in his view, potentially dangerous shift in the dominant mode of thought, the kind of questions we were asking, the kind of answers we found satisfying. You see, early cybernetics, what we now often call first-order cybernetics, emerged from World War II research. And it basically proposed that the world could be understood and, crucially, controlled by analyzing feedback loops, systems, control mechanisms. It focused heavily on things like information flow, communication, self-regulation, viewing systems, whether they were machines or biological organisms or social groups, as things that could be analyzed and optimized from the outside. For Heidegger, this represented a profound transformation. It was a shift away from philosophical reflection on being, those fundamental questions about existence, meaning, our place in the cosmos, towards a purely technological mode of thinking. A mode that prioritized efficiency, calculability, control, and optimization above absolutely everything else. His deep fear was that this new technological framework, perfectly embodied by cybernetics at the time, would completely overshadow and ultimately replace that deeper reflective inquiry into human existence, into nature, into meaning. Everything would just get reduced to functional problem solving and optimization. It represented for him the ultimate triumph of instrumental reason over philosophical wisdom.
Okay, so if we connect that back, this sounds exactly like the standing reserve concept we talked about earlier, where everything, including us, just becomes a resource to be managed and controlled.
Exactly. It connects perfectly, and it really underscores why Heidegger was so alarmed. His central critique of technology, remember, is that it reduces everything, nature, people, time, to mere standing reserve, best stand, a resource pool, basically. Everything is seen simply as something to be used, optimized, controlled for specific ends. First-order cybernetics, as this powerful and spreading framework for organizing and understanding systems, biological, mechanical, social, psychological, it fits into this enframing like a key in a lock. It provides the intellectual toolkit and the practical methods to treat the world precisely as standing reserve. In this context, first-order cybernetics offers this seemingly comprehensive model of system control where, conceptually at least, everything can be measured, processed, optimized within defined boundaries. Heidegger genuinely feared this approach would become the dominant worldview. that it would effectively replace the deeper ontological reflections of philosophy with a purely functional, instrumental way of thinking. The philosophical quest to understand what it means to be, to grapple with human existence and purpose, that would just get overshadowed by a technological mindset. A mindset that treats the world not as a place for profound human reflection and dwelling, but simply as a collection of interlocking systems to be controlled and managed for maximum output. And we see this everywhere, don't we? It's become completely normal, almost invisible, to talk about humans as resources, to the point where it's almost unthinkable for a large organization not to have a human resources department. Heidegger warned that this kind of language, this way of thinking, reduces human life to just a set of inputs and outputs. It completely neglects the far more profound questions of existence, meaning, dignity, purpose. Philosophy's traditional role, the search for wisdom, for understanding being deeply, would, he feared, be replaced by purely functional managerial thinking. The questions shift from what is the good life or what is truth to how do we optimize this process? How do we stabilize this system? How do we predict these outcomes more accurately? In that kind of world, humans themselves risk becoming just another type of standing reserve. Mere resources to be managed, data points in complex systems, rather than beings capable of questioning their own existence, capable of care, capable of dwelling meaningfully. And this, crucially, raises huge ethical questions about dehumanization and purpose questions, often completely missing from purely managerial or instrumental thinking. This is precisely why the emergence of second-order cybernetics is so incredibly important, because it directly confronts many of these Heideggerian concerns. It actually aligns surprisingly well with Heidegger's own later, more nuanced ideas, offering a potential path out of the Gestell.
That raises the crucial question then. Is there a way forward? If Heidegger was so critical of this technological mindset, how does second-order cybernetics offer a different path? One that doesn't fall into the same traps.
It's a really vital pivot point in the whole discussion, absolutely. Heidegger argues that modernity, driven by technology, fundamentally transforms the world into a representable object. It becomes like a picture that stands before us, the human subject, ready for analysis, manipulation, control. As he famously says, and Harris highlights this quote too, the fundamental event of the modern age is the conquest of the world as picture. This isn't just about having new tools, it redefines what the world is for us. Everything becomes a resource, flattened out, available for our calculation and control, like looking at a map or a blueprint. And first-order cybernetics, with its focus on mapping systems, building models, aiming for objective control. It perfectly mirrors this tendency to treat the world as a picture, a blueprint to be engineered. But then something really significant happened intellectually. Second-order cybernetics emerged mainly in the 1970s with thinkers like Heinz von Foerster, Humberto Maturana, Gordon Pask. And this is where it radically turns inward. It starts asking fundamentally different questions than first order. Who is doing the observing? What does it even mean to know something? What is the observer's role in the system being observed? It completely breaks from that traditional God's eye view. The idea that an observer can stand outside a system and look in objectively, neutrally, as if from nowhere. Instead, in second-order cybernetics, the observer is never external to the system. They are an inherent, inseparable part of it. You can't observe a system without being in a system that includes you and the observed. Observation itself stops being passive. It becomes an active process, an action, a construction, an intervention. You cannot observe without affecting, or in a sense, creating what you observe through the act of observation itself. And this is where it resonates so deeply with Heidegger's philosophy, particularly being in the world. We are not just out there looking into some pre-given objective world that exists totally independently of us, waiting to be perfectly mirrored in our minds like a photograph. Rather, we are actively disclosing the world, bringing it forth through our care, through our practical engagement, through our being in the world. Our world doesn't just sit there. It unfolds for us through our concerns, our history, our actions. Knowledge, then, isn't about correspondence having a perfect mental picture that matches external reality. Instead, knowledge is about involvement. It's about being attuned to a situation. It's about knowing how to go on in the world. It's about practical competence, skillful participation, engaged understanding. There is no view from nowhere because we don't navigate life by consulting abstract internal maps that perfectly represent some external territory. We act skillfully because we are already attuned to the world through our bodies, our history of engagement, our practical concerns. We are already involved in what we observe, and our very observations shape the world that comes into view for us.
That sounds very much like what von Forster meant with his famous line, "The map is all we have." It suggests our understanding is always, in a sense, internal and limited, but maybe that limitation isn't actually a weakness.
Absolutely. Von Forster used that phrase, "the map is all we have," to really sharpen this critique of pure objective representation. It's definitely a nod to Alfred Korzybski's earlier famous line, "the map is not the territory," which means our models aren't the reality itself. We all kind of know that. But von Forster goes much further, much deeper. He's suggesting that there is literally no access to the territory outside of our ongoing process of mapping. And this doesn't mean we just carry static mental blueprints around. It's far more dynamic. It means our experience of reality is always mediated by our own cognitive processes, our history, our interactions, our structure as living beings. Instead, cognition, for von Forster and Maturana, is about structural coupling. What that means, basically, is that when a system like us is perturbed by its environment, when something happens to it, it responds not by perfectly reflecting that external event, but according to its own internal structure and its history of past interactions. This view suggests knowledge doesn't arise from making accurate representations, like a camera taking a picture. Rather, knowledge arises from historically tuned participation. We are actively bringing forth a world through our interactions, through our choices, our responses. We're not passively mirroring a world that's already fully formed and objective out there. This is why von Forster also famously said, "If you want to see, learn how to act." That's such a powerful punchline, a core insight. It means understanding emerges fundamentally from doing, from our active engagement with the world. Seeing isn't prior to action. Rather, what we see and how we understand is profoundly shaped by how we move, how we respond, how we interact, and crucially, how we care within the world. Just like Heidegger's hammer that's ready to hand, our understanding is fundamentally practical, embodied, engaged, not purely theoretical or representational. The map, in von Forster's sense, isn't a neutral diagram or a static picture in the head. It's more like a trace of our ongoing engagement, a record of our dynamic interaction, always being updated. And this leads directly to a profound ethical insight of this whole constructivist perspective. We are responsible for the worlds we bring forth, because if there's no truly neutral observation, if there's only involvement, then we don't just passively see the world. We actively enact distinctions through our actions, our perceptions, our language. And those choices matter profoundly. They shape what becomes real and meaningful, not just for us, but for others too.
Okay, so putting all this together, these incredible insights from Heidegger, from second-order cybernetics, how do we actually proceed? In a world that seems increasingly dominated by technology, by complex systems, what's the practical wisdom here for navigating our lives, our work, our communities?
Well, Heidegger's ultimate answer, his suggested path for navigating the pervasive threat of technological enframing of Gestell, is a concept he called Releasement, in German, Gelassenheit. Now, this isn't about withdrawing from the world or rejecting technology entirely, becoming some kind of Luddite. Not at all. Instead, it's about cultivating a specific posture, a posture of openness, a kind of letting be of beings, allowing things to be what they are without immediately trying to force them into our categories or put them to use. It embodies both a refusal to dominate, to control everything, and at the same time, a readiness to engage with the world, but in a fundamentally different way. More attentive, more responsive, less imposing. And this idea of releasement, it echoes so strongly the profound ethics embedded within second-order cybernetics. It's a deep recognition that true control is never total, that our knowing is always situated, always partial, always from our own perspective and context, and that systems themselves are far too rich, too complex, too dynamic to ever be fully grasped or perfectly captured by any single model or description. It's fundamentally a call to humility, to responsibility for our observations, for the distinctions we make, for the worlds we bring forth, and to genuine care for the entities, the beings, the people we engage with. We don't stand apart from the world looking at it objectively as if it's just out there, complete, waiting to be perfectly represented in our minds. Instead, we actively bring forth the world through our involvement, through our practical activity, our care, our concerns, our relationships. The world is constantly revealing itself to us, and we are active participants, co-creators in that revealing. So when you place Heidegger's philosophy and second-order cybernetics side by side, this really powerful ethical sensibility emerges, one that's often sorely missing, frankly, from a lot of modern managerial or purely technical thinking. We are urged to act as observers who deeply understand that our observations matter. They actively shape what becomes real, for ourselves and for others. We are encouraged to opt for situations, for actions where future possibilities are protected or kept open. Because true freedom in this sense isn't just about choice now. It's about preserving and expanding future possibilities for flourishing, not shutting them down through rigid control or short-sighted optimization. We must actively resist the reduction of everything, especially human beings, but also nature to mere resources, mere standing reserve to be exploited. We're encouraged to find a balance between calculative thinking, which is useful, necessary for efficiency, for problem solving, and meditative thinking. That slower, deeper reflection that allows for attunement, appreciation, understanding the richness of being. Cybernetics might offer incredibly powerful tools for understanding complexity, for navigating feedback loops, for communication, but it must always be nested within these deeper questions of meaning, purpose, ethical engagement. Otherwise, it just becomes another tool of the Gestell. As a kind of powerful synthesis, a guiding principle, we could say, and this is another key takeaway, we should learn to dwell and not to dominate. Our fundamental task, maybe, is not to master the world in a controlling sense, but to participate wisely, responsibly, and ethically in its ongoing unfolding, with a spirit of care, humility, and openness.
Wow. Today, we've really gone on quite a journey, haven't we? Rethinking not just what we mean by systems, but how we fundamentally relate to them, how we relate to the world. It feels like a call to a much deeper, more ethical, and ultimately a more human way of knowing and being.
Indeed, it really is. And it brings us right back to Heidegger's incredibly poignant, almost desperate final statement from that 1966 Der Spiegel interview, the one published after his death, where he famously concluded, "Only a God can save us." Now, he wasn't literally advocating for prayer or waiting for some divine intervention to fix everything. That wasn't his point. What he was truly imploring us to realize, I think, is the sheer magnitude of the shift required. We need a fundamental, almost radical change in how we think, how we see the world, how we act within it. A shift so profound that, in his view, it felt almost beyond our normal human capacity to achieve without some kind of transcendent impulse or a complete reorientation of our entire civilization's trajectory. And maybe, just maybe, second-order cybernetics, when it's understood in its deepest, most ethical sense we've been exploring today, maybe it can help us return to that fundamental question. How are we to live meaningfully, responsibly in this technological age? Because treating the world as merely a picture, as an object to be controlled and optimized, it blinds us. It blinds us to other profound ways the world can reveal itself, ways that are poetic, responsive, ethical, ways rooted in care and dwelling. Second-order cybernetics, in turn, powerfully reminds us that every single act of observation is also an act of construction. We are participants, not just spectators. This reframes truth itself, not as a simple correspondence, a perfect match between our ideas and some external reality, but maybe as coherence within a relational, historical, ongoing process. Meaning doesn't arise from detached representation, it arises from our deep, involved engagement with the world, with each other. And we ultimately bear this profound responsibility for how the world comes into view, for the distinctions we make, for the realities we help bring forth through our actions, our choices, our language. So both Heidegger and second-order cybernetics, when you see them through this lens, they offer this shared invitation. An invitation to move beyond the relentless pursuit of prediction and control, and instead move towards participation, humility, responsibility, and care.
That is a lot to mull over, definitely. And it's a wonderful, challenging perspective on how we approach our lives and work. We really encourage you, our listeners, to explore more of Harish's insightful work. You can find his blog at harish'snotebook.wordpress.com. That's Harish's Notebook, all one word, .wordpress.com. And if you're interested in connecting with others who are passionate about these kinds of ideas, check out the Cybersyn community he's part of. Again, that's spelled CYB3RSYN, Cybersyn. As always, keep learning and keep diving deep into the fascinating complexities of our world.